Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish Prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.
Hi folks, and welcome back to Through a Scottish Prism midweek special. I hope you and yours are well. As you know, this midweek show is always about things happening outside of Scotland in the Scottish bubble of politics. And there's no two bigger things going on just now, as we all know. There's what's going on in Palestine and what's going on in Ukraine. And so to join me this week to discuss that and what's going on, I am delighted, absolutely delighted to have a good friend of the show who we haven't had for far too long. He's been a busy, busy man. I'm delighted to warm welcome back to Tommy Sheridan.
Hi, Roddy.
Tommy, my friend, how are you?
I'm fine, pal. Yeah, I as you say there, I've recently completed a 2-year master's degree in social work, so I'm now a qualified social worker. So I've not been as around in the last couple of years as I would have liked to have been. So it's very privileged to be invited to come back on Scottish Prism, because it's a fantastic show and it's kept us going through many years. And some of those years haven't been very, very bright in terms of the independence movement because of the dashed hopes that we've had from SNP leadership. So it's great to be part of it again.
Welcome to everyone. Yeah, just a quick. I mean, if you remember the John Cleese thing where he was the German guest, and he went, "Don't mention the war." Well, we've got the same rule in here: don't mention the football, Tommy. Okay.
The problem is you're speaking to a left of socialist Republican, and you've mentioned rules, and I say, of course, rules. They're no for me.
Well, I hope your team gets battered on Saturday. That's all I'm saying.
At the end of the day, whatever happens on Saturday is largely irrelevant, Roddy, because the major prize has already been handed out, and it's ours. So that's the main thing.
Yeah. There you go. And that's all for tonight, folks. And we'll see you soon. Right. Anyway, back to the more serious stuff.
More serious stuff.
That stuff. I know, Tommy, like myself, and I left there, that what's going on in the world in the two conflicts areas is really affecting you the same way as it's affecting me. In Palestine is one of the worst. And so a lot of things I'd like to discuss, but if I may start, Techie, can you stick up the ICC headline about Netanyahu? There we go. Benjamin Netanyahu disgusted at the arrest warrant. You've got to admit, Tommy, he's got a bit of chumpa if he's disgusted. I mean, this genocide has unfolded in front of our eyes. It can't be denied.
Roddy, anyone with eyes to see and ears to hear cannot deny the absolute slaughter of innocent men, women, and unfortunately thousands and thousands of children before our eyes. It is the 21st century's genocide. It is the most horrific and evil thing that I've witnessed in my life. I'm sure I'm not the only person who can't continue to watch the videos that we're getting from Gaza and from Rafah. Young kids with their heads blown apart, some of them being operated on without anaesthetic, some of them crying uncontrollably, asking where their mums and dads are because they've been blown to smithereens. It is the darkest period in my lifetime. I know others are maybe older than me, but it is the darkest period in my lifetime that I've ever physically witnessed. And I absolutely despair at anyone who refuses to stand up for Palestine, who refuses to condemn Israel in the strongest terms. I find it shocking that these bastards were represented at the Eurovision Song Contest. I think it's shocking that FIFA has refused to expel them from the football competitions. I listen to some of our politicians, Roddy, and I despair at the lack of a spinal column that they've got, refusing to condemn Israel and call them for the genocidal murderers that they are. And this deliberate conflation of attacking Israel with anti-Semitism has to be called out all the time. Attacking Israel doesn't make you anti-Semitic, of course. It makes you human. It makes you someone who actually treasures flesh and blood. And we should never flinch at attacking Israel, at attacking Zionism, and pointing out to anybody with half a morsel of a brain cell that there is a difference between Judaism and Zionism. Zionism is a reactionary terrorist creed. Judaism is a religion, and being anti-Zionist, being anti-Israeli does not make you anti-Judaism, and it doesn't make you anti-Semitic. So we have to be absolutely staunch in the face of this, Roddy. I feel powerless. I don't know about you, but when you see the British forces being used recently to help defend Israel from Iran, and we had British aircraft being used to shoot down drones, I say to myself, what the hell are we doing? Why are we not involved in defending Palestine from Israel? That's what I want to be involved in. And you think back to the 36 and the brigades in Spain, and people joining the brigades to try and defend the democratically elected government in Spain. I know that you're in Spain and in Barcelona, and you say to yourself, that internationalism, I think it would be alive today. See if there was an organisation asking people to go and join to fight Israel against what they're doing against Palestine. I think they would get hundreds of thousands of volunteers who would sign up. And it's something personally that I would applaud people for doing, So, listen, Roddy, we're conflicted, brother. We really are conflicted, because I think both you and I hate war. We hate war. We hate the loss of life. We hate innocent people being killed, and that simply goes hand in hand with war. Any war, innocent people are killed. This isn't a war, because in a war you've usually got two armies fighting against each other. This isn't a war. This is a slaughter. This is a slaughter, and that's something that we've got to, in all our might, we've got to oppose it as best we can.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. The two of us have been opposed to war opposed most of our lives. But the fact, and I understand, I empathise with your position, I would applaud as well that old peaceniks like us can be saying that we would find circumstances to clap people going to war. Shows you how bad it is. But the one thing I would disagree slightly with you on, Tom, is I know you're saying you can't watch the videos. I find it horrific too. I would like everyone to see these videos, because this is not a John Wayne movie. They need to see it, and it's been blocked out of Western media. So let's get it out. Let people see the horrific, disgusting genocide that's unfolding.
Roddy, what you've just said is exactly what goes through my mind. Every time I'm on X, I come across a video, I feel repulsed, I feel like crying, and I think to myself, don't move on. Don't move on. Share it. Share it. Share it. Share it. And then you feel so inadequate, because you look for an icon to put beside the video, and the wee tears or the wee broken heart, it's not enough to display the disgust that you feel, but it's all that you've got. And I agree with you. You cannot just move on. Don't just pass over it. I think you've got to repost, and try and get through to ordinary people across the world who are not seeing on the corporate media the extent of the massacre that's taken place.
But there's the other thing. As I say, it's unfolding before our eyes. I mean, during the Second World War, there could be all sorts of excuses put up for why the West didn't intervene in the Holocaust, in the concentration camps, because there wasn't the ability to know exactly what was going on. But this is unfolded, and in real time, everyone's a cameraman, everyone's a citizen journalist. It's all coming out. And yet there are American politicians who are threatening the court. They're going to go after the ICC for daring to bring warrants out against Netanyahu and Gallant, and yet they were the same ones who were applauding when that were done against Putin. The hypocrisy and double standards. And any other court, if you and I tomorrow did something on a court case in Scotland or any other country in the world, you'd be arrested for interfering with a court, contempt of court. It's appalling.
The stench of hypocrisy is now overwhelming, Roddy. The old world order, in my opinion, we probably would need several programmes to discuss the demise of imperialism in its current context. But imperialism, American imperialism, is dying. It's becoming decrepit, it's becoming decaying, it's stinking with hypocrisy. And like any other empire that has crumbled, it doesn't go without horror. It doesn't go without destruction. It's like it's death throes. And I think the American imperialist system is in its death throes. I think in many respects, although they will claim victory, Israel will undoubtedly claim victory. It's a Pyrrhic victory, a horrible, horrible Pyrrhic victory, because what they have lost in terms of the way they've conducted this war is far greater than anything they will be able to claim they've won from a PR point of view. The world now knows who Israel is and what Israel is. The world, I would argue, because people keep talking about 7th October 23, that this is the start of it. You and I know 7th October 1948 is when it started, not 2023. But in terms of the world's view of Israel, I think the response to what happened on 7th October is exposed this nation as nothing more and nothing less than a terrorist state. Unfortunately, full of some very, very unsavoury people. Undoubtedly, there are some people there who oppose Netanyahu, but I'm afraid the very existence of Israel and the way it was formed is coming home to roost now. It is a nation of entitlement. It's a nation of theft. It's a nation of violence. Come into my home. It used to belong to somebody else. That's the way they conduct their affairs. They are a disgrace to humanity, is the truth of the matter. And anyone, Roddy, anyone that's not prepared to condemn Israel and call for sanctions, call for a boycott, stop arming them, I just think they share and are complicit with genocide, and they should be outed as nothing more and nothing less than the enablers of genocide.
Towards the end of last year, I had Craig Murray on, and he said, as an ex-ambassador, he said, well, but now the lawyers in the Foreign Office will be writing to the Prime Minister, the Defence Secretary and the Leader of the Opposition to say, watch what you're saying, watch what you're doing, because we could be end up in the Hague ourselves, being complicit in a war crime and genocide. But this is the kind of thing you get. Techie, could you stick up that video of Mr. Starmer? Mr. Keir, the socialist.
I'm very clear. Israel does have that right to defend herself, and Hamas bears responsibility.
A siege is appropriate? Cutting off power, cutting off water?
Well, I think that Israel does have that right. It is an ongoing situation. Obviously, everything should be done within international law, but I don't want to step away from the sort of core principles that Israel has a right to defend herself and Hamas bears responsibility for these terrorist acts. And I would call on all responsible states, particularly Middle East responsible states, to call this out for what it is, and to stand with the world in utterly condemning these actions by Hamas.
It's amazing. It's all Hamas's fault. But he says, yeah, it's okay to cut off water and power, which is a war crime in international law. And then his next breath, Tommy, is saying, yeah, but they've got to be within international law. Now, it's not as if he doesn't know. He was a lawyer. He was a top lawyer. He knows cutting off water, cutting off power, and collective punishment are war crimes.
Roddy, look, I apologise, mate, because you and I are quite intelligent people, and we've got extensive vocabularies, and therefore I apologise for using perhaps inappropriate language. But he's a fucking rat. He's a rat, is what he is. This is a guy who goes onto that show and justifies cutting off power for hospitals to operate in wee wains. This is a guy who justifies cutting off water for children who are suffering from famine and dehydration. This is a guy who justifies Israel targeting children and blowing them to smithereens, and then spends weeks thereafter trying to backtrack when he realises that the world isn't with him at all. The world is with Palestine. The politicians that bought off politicians that have had hundreds and millions from the Israeli lobby, they're with Israel because they've been bought and sold. But the world, ordinary people across the world, they are with Palestine and they are with the Palestinian people in the spirit they have displayed. And they ought to learn from history and learn some lessons. Hamas was rejected in the West Bank. They were voted into power in Gaza. Now, whether we like it or no, that's who the people of Gaza voted for. But the idea that you can kill a movement, kill a cause, don't they understand history? You can always kill the individual, but you can never kill the idea. And the idea of freedom for the people of Palestine will never be destroyed by no matter how many missiles that they fire. And that rat that you had on there, that Starmer rat, I hope the chickens come home to roost. I know this is about international politics, Roddy, but you know what? International politics is probably going to play a bigger part in the British general election this time than in any of the elections that I can remember. Perhaps the only one that bears any resemblance would be the 82 general election, where undoubtedly Argentina played in the whole Malvinas invasion, played a role in that election. In fact, it saved Thatcher's bacon, if the truth is told. And anybody that wants to read on that will be able to confirm that. I hope that any person with a progressive fibre in their body votes for alternatives to the British Labour Party. And as you know, you and I have our disagreements with George Galloway. George doesn't support independence. I have big disagreements with him on that particular issue. But I've got to say to you, I was over the moon when he won his seat. Absolutely over the moon when he won his seat. And I hope he wins more seats. I hope he wins more seats, and I hope he wipes that smirk off that rat's face, because he doesn't deserve to be the Prime Minister of the UK.
No. I'll just say on the George Galloway, which gave me even greater pleasure, was that the second guy was an independent with 6,000 votes as well.
Yes.
All of the main parties were rejected by the voters. And you're right, there's a disconnect between the public, not just in the UK, Scotland, but throughout the world, under bought and paid for politicians. Just to add to what Tommy was saying, Techie, could you stick up that one about the handcuffs? Well, there's a real doctrine that detained Palestinians are undergoing routine amputations for handcuff injuries. I mean, it's just, it's beyond description to me, Tommy. I can't sometimes take it. But this trying to avoid being held accountable. Can you stick up Joanna Cherry's and her very good intervention in the House of Parliament down in London?
On the issue of the jurisdiction of the ICC, the government's statement is out of step not just with the prosecutor, but also with the impartial independent panel of experts on international law from whom he sought advice, which consisted largely of lawyers from this jurisdiction, by that which I mean England and Wales, not my own. Here's what they said, and I want the Minister to tell me what part of this is wrong. The panel agrees with the prosecutor's assessment that the ICC has jurisdiction in relation to crimes committed on the territory of Palestine, including Gaza, under Article 12(2)A of the ICC statute. It also agrees that the court has jurisdiction over crimes committed by Palestinian nationals inside or outside Palestinian territory under Article 12(2)B of the statute. The ICC therefore has jurisdiction over Israeli, Palestinian or other nationals who committed crimes in Gaza or the West Bank. It also has jurisdiction over Palestinian nationals who committed crimes on the territory of Israel, even though Israel is not an ICC state party. The basis for the court's jurisdiction is that Palestine, including Gaza, is a state for the purpose of the ICC statute. The ICC's pre-trial chamber has already ruled that the court's jurisdiction extends to Palestine as a state party to the ICC statute on this basis. That is the opinion of an illustrious list of mainly English lawyers, with the exception of my dear colleague Baroness Helena Kennedy, who of course is a Scot, although at the English bar. Can the Minister, and I see he's got one of the law officers sitting beside him, can the Minister tell me which part of that opinion is wrong?
Well, Mr Deputy Speaker, the Honourable Lady is an immensely distinguished advocate and lawyer, and she will have read the letter signed by no less than 600 lawyers, which broadly agrees with what she has said. But she may also have read the letter from, I think, 1,000 lawyers who disagreed with that, which shows that there are many different interpretations on this matter. Hers is one, and the view of the government, as I've set out, is another.
Avoiding the question, Joanna absolutely nailed it, nailed him. But here's the point: the Americans are trying to think, oh, you don't have jurisdiction over Israel, so you can't hold a trial. They never signed up to the Rome Act, and you can't come after Americans either because we haven't signed up to it. So move on. It's despicable looking for a loophole to get away from genocide.
Roddy, you know, there are layers to the question. The International Criminal Court is also supposed to recognise the inalienable right of any occupied state to defend itself. The reason we are told that it is acceptable to arm Ukraine to the teeth is because their sovereign territory has been occupied by another nation state, namely Russia, and therefore it's okay to arm them to the teeth to fight against the occupying force. And yet, Israel, according to every single international court judgment, including the whole of the United Nations Assembly on several occasions, has determined that Israel is illegally occupying Palestine. If Israel is illegally occupying Palestine, who are we to deny Palestine the right to repel their occupiers? And whether that be with sticks and stones, which unfortunately is what it is most of the time, or whether it be with weapons that they've managed to smuggle in from neighbouring nations to try and defend themselves. I do not condemn self-defence of the nation of Palestine. Palestine should be able to defend itself. People have a go at me in relation to Russia and Ukraine. People say Ukraine should be able to defend itself. And I say, well, yeah, that's a war. Ukraine did defend itself. What I'm opposed to is that the rest of the world has decided to move in and arm Ukraine and make sure that Ukraine has to expend the lifeblood of its very, very nation. They're now having to kidnap people from European countries to serve in a war that they've got absolutely no prospect of winning. But it doesn't matter. There's still big arms deals to be sold and billions of pounds worth to be made for the military-industrial complex in America. NATO doesn't give a toss about ordinary Ukrainians. They only give a toss about trying to drain Russia. And that has backfired spectacularly because Russia isn't drained at all. Russia has been emboldened. Russia is more powerful now than it was 2 years ago. And Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, India, all those involved with the BRICS movement, they are building a new world order and leaving the old world order behind. The old world order, as I said earlier, in my opinion, is disintegrating before our eyes, Roddy. And the idea that they're going to deny the remit of the International Criminal Court, it just shows you it's this hypocrisy again. The rule of law is sacrosanct until the rule of law goes against you. and then let's just throw it out. You know, it's just pathetic.
International-based rules, and what are those rules? Yeah, you don't need to know. We'll tell you them as we go along. It is the hypocrisy, because all our lives we've been told that we're the good guys, Tommy. We're the good guys. Israel are the good guys, and you know the Russians are the bad guys. The Muslims are the bad people. You know, all this. The Iranians, terrible. And the reality is, when you see them trying to interfere, if they believe that Israel is innocent and it's committed no genocide, then why wouldn't you embrace the court case, Tommy, and say, we're going to go to court and we're going to prove it and we're going to shut you all up? Surely if you're the innocent man, that's what you do.
Roddy, every single story that the Israeli state and their friends in the international corporate media have put out. You remember that Biden talked about having seen pictures of children being torn from the womb of pregnant mothers and burned in ovens. There are no pictures because it didn't happen. It's complete and utter lies. Multiple rapes that we're told of. The idea of the use of ovens to kill prisoners. It's absolute nonsense. Lie. As long as they lie often enough and we use powerful agencies to do it, maybe the rest of the world will accept it. The truth is, the rest of the world is getting wise to it. The rest of the world sees the real atrocities, and they're not being committed by Hamas. They're not being committed by Palestinians. They're being committed by the IDF, the most brutal and cowardly army on this planet, who are destroying children and then putting videos up onto social media, celebrating the fact that they've murdered thousands and thousands of innocent women and children. It is sick to the core, Roddy. But see that point you made earlier? I think it's so important, because before this massacre, before this genocide, Israel was able to portray itself as the victim, even though they'd been illegally occupying a nation for over 70 years. They were portraying themselves as the victim. Now nobody sees them as a victim. Nobody with a sense, nobody with the ability to open their eyes sees them as a victim. They see them as the aggressor, as the terrorist, as the rogue nation, which quite frankly has to be brought to heel. And these leaders, are so-called leaders, if they're not in an international criminal court soon, then you might as well just rip it up, because nobody will have any semblance of respect for that court any longer.
I mean, that's the thing. Biden came out with another one today. I don't know if you've had a chance to see it. Where he said he's seen a video where the Palestinians got this mother and child, Jewish mother and child, Israeli, bound them up, tied them tight, poured petrol on them, and set fire to it. This is the President of the United States. And they were dancing around and laughing.
Let's see it, Rod. That's the point. Let's see it. If it's that horrific, put it up. Let's see it. Get Code and Powell to show us it. It'll just be the same as the weapons of mass destruction.
But it's the insult to our intelligence and our logic. I mean, as you talked about with Ukraine now, they're saying to China, well, you know, it's all right for us in the West and everyone to supply Ukraine, but, well, you can't supply Russia. Oh, well, you're not playing fair, old chap. It is the absolute hypocrisy. But can you imagine, Tommy, if Russia, I was going to say first, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, now geography wasn't my best subject at school, Tommy, I've got to admit, but they're moving to Asia. Now, to the best of my knowledge, the Atlantic is not in Asia, but they're moving out there. But can you imagine if Russia suddenly turned around and say, well, tell you what, we've decided with Iran, North Korea and China, we're going to have our own NATO-type organisation. And if you attack one of us, you're attacking all of us. You know, can you imagine the outcry by the NATO and the warmongers?
Roddy, listen, I hate to discuss these types of things, because there are unintended consequences, and you've always got to despair at what can happen. But one of my biggest regrets, and I hate saying this, Palestine has been pulverised. Palestine has been slaughtered. People, 15,000 children, another 15,000 civilians, unarmed civilians. And I look at those nations surrounding Palestine, and I say, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you not defending Palestine? Why are you not involved? I know Iran retaliated for the attack on the embassy in Syria, and the attack was based on, a 48-hour warning of how many drones they were going to send and all that. It was all calculated. I know that some within Israel would welcome a wider conflict because it would play into their hands of, see what I mean, we're the victims, now we demand America defends us. But I'll tell you what, I feel let down because if you're being subjected to bullying from a bully, then you hope that somebody will stand up for you. And nobody's standing up physically, apart from the Yemeni Houthis. What they have done. What they have done in terms of physically retaliating against ships. I applaud them. People say, "Oh, it's the disgrace." I said, "Disgrace? No, what's a disgrace is the slaughter of innocent men, women, and children in Palestine. And what's a disgrace is that the British RAF and the American military have been involved in defending Israel from a legal response, a legal military response from Iran. If you attack a nation's embassy, that is a war crime. You are entitled to retaliate. So that retaliation was legal. And instead of standing back and saying, well, you reap what you sow, Israel, this is what you've done, you're going to have to deal with it. No, we'll come in and defend you. Where's the bloody RAF defending the children in Rafah and the children in Gaza? Why have they not been defending them? How dare we have a situation where we accept that we can't get aid in because Israel's blocking it? What are we saying? That we're not powerful enough to deal with Israel? Push them aside and tell them loud and clear, we're taking aid in, whether you like it or not. And if you turn your guns on us, we'll turn our guns on you. So that's why I hate discussing it, Roddy, because it becomes very militaristic. And we all love peace. We all want to embrace peace. But I'm definitely not one of those turn the other cheek guys. Somebody hits me, I'm hitting them back. And I certainly don't want to strike the first blow, but I'm not going to let you use me as a punch bag. And unfortunately, what the world is doing right now is shameful because they have stood by and allowed Palestinian children to be slaughtered. And it's unforgivable.
Yeah, it's also cowardice because Zelensky, quite rightly, when the Royal Air Force and the US Air Force and the French Air Force defended Israel, he was saying, well, wait a minute, why don't you come and defend us against the missiles coming in from Russia? Well, the answer is quite simple, President Zelensky, because the Russians can hit back, the Palestinians can't. It's cowardice, absolute cowardice. And, they're good. The British and the Americans and the French are dead tough when they're fighting people that can't hit back, Tommy. And it disgusts me. But out of this, every so often things happen, people come along, like one of my great heroes, Mandela, who was kept away from us for years. But South Africa's done it again. Tekkie, can you stick up the wonderful South African foreign minister? She's just, I love this woman to bits, Tommy.
We didn't meet the Palestinian people on October 8. We've been together in struggle for many, many decades. The people of Palestine trained the freedom fighters of the liberation movement. This is a relationship of freedom fighters, of activists, of nations that share a history of struggle for justice and freedom. It is not a matter of yesterday. It is not a matter of the election tomorrow. It's an issue of justice. It's an issue of fighting colonialism. It's an issue of fighting racism. It's an issue of fighting occupation. It's an issue of upholding the Charter of the United Nations, which says every nation deserves their sovereign integrity. The people of Palestine deserve their sovereign right to their land. if you have a few hours, could you take your time and just make a poster? The poster should read, "Stop Genocide," and go and stand outside 5 embassies. There are 5 primary supporters of Israel. I'm not going to name them for you. You must do your work. As the women in black did for us when we were fighting apartheid. Stand up and petition. Stand up and protest. Stand up and be visible. Don't only come to this dinner. Be visible in support of the people of Palestine. Be visible.
But, while the United Kingdom, the United States, Britain, Germany have disgraced themselves, shamed us, and not in my name, and I'm sure for all those nationalities there'll be lots of people saying the same, South Africa has come out of this with great credit. They didn't need to do this, but they've shown honour and they've shown decency, and they have not been scared because they know they're going to get a lot of pushback by it. Absolutely brilliant by South Africa.
Definitely, Roddy, but you watch and you're inspired by the courage, by the wisdom, by the words of that woman, President South Africa, and then you realise why America's banning TikTok. Because that type of message getting out to the world is what they're really banning. They can't have that. They can't have an alternative to their biased, distorted, dishonest narrative. They can't have that going out across the world. That's why they're attacking these organisations. That's why the Al Jazeeras of the world are getting thrown out of Israel. That's why Russian television can't even be accessed from British terrestrial boxes now. You just don't allow an alternative narrative. We've got a situation with the British media where they condemn hand over fist, whether it's North Korea, whether it's Iran, whether it's Russia, whether it's China. And one of the biggest condemnations is freedom of the press. Julian Assange has been in jail for 5 years. For what? For telling the truth, for exposing war crimes. And these people have the hypocrisy to preach to other countries about what they do with journalists when we've got Julian Assange 5 years in prison. It is utter. It is a sewerage, stinking, rancid smell of hypocrisy that is an indicator of the decaying nature of the American imperialist world that we've got now, Roddy. And I just take so much strength from what those American students have been doing. I despise America as a society. I think it is a horrible, horrible society based on racism, based on violence, based on division, based on trying to always do down the ordinary person in favour of the rich. And yet these students show that there is another side to America, that I shouldn't be so one-sided, that there is a compassion as well, that there is a belief in humanity, and there's also a courage to actually do something about it. And yet you look at the way they've been treated by state troopers, by militarised police forces, battering their heads in. That happens in China. Oh, just shows you it's an authoritarian regime. It happens in Russia. Oh, that there should be regime change. There should be regime change. It's happening in America. It's happening in Holland. It's happening in France. It's happening in Germany. It is a disgrace that ordinary young people predominantly who are standing up and saying, not in my name, no more genocide, and they're getting a baton over their skull for having the courage to stand up for Palestinian children.
I see in Germany they made a law where you can't demonstrate for Palestine. I don't have the video here, but I saw a video on social media where in Berlin, tens of thousands, it looked like, took to the streets and said, to hell with you, we're marching, what are you going to do, arrest us all? It's quite shocking. Techie, can you stick up that the resolutions one? This is just the fact, again, of the hypocrisies we're going about, Tommy, all the time. Israel has broken 65 UN resolutions with no consequence, Iraq, which you and I know, and many others tried to avoid, or get stopped, got invaded, bombed, destroyed, and sent back to the Middle Ages. That is the hypocrisy of the Western world. I go back to stop anyone who's watching this. I don't think there's many, but anyone who's watching this and thinks that we're the good guys. We're not. Understand it? We're not the good guys. 65 resolutions. No wonder they're doing what they're doing, Tommy, because they know they can get away with anything because the Americans and the British and the French will make sure there's no repercussions for them. So they just keep doing it.
Listen, Roddy, you've got a situation where the old world, the world that you and I were brought up in, that world, those imperialist leaders decided that they didn't want. They used to arm Saddam Hussein and they used to love Saddam Hussein, but then he became a wee bit disobedient, so they decided to turn on him and the narrative had to change. You know, we used to say when they were trying to look for weapons of mass destruction, all they had to do was check their receipt books because any weapons they had were sold to them by Britain and America, so they would have been able to do that no problem. But we knew that wasn't about weapons, it was about oil, and it was about access to cheap oil. They decided they were going to destroy Iraq. They decided that the idea of free energy and free access to homes and a higher standard of living was unacceptable. So they destroyed Libya as well. Colonel Gaddafi became the devil incarnate. So they were to destroy that. They destroyed Afghanistan. They decided to target Syria. So they destroyed Syria. But what happened in Syria, in my opinion, Roddy, became a wee bit of the beginning of the turning of the wheel. Because in Syria, the Syrian government was on the edge, on the precipice of being destroyed by ISIS, by horrible, horrible individuals, armed, trained by America, and the Russians intervened. The Russians intervened, and the whole nature of the war, the direction of that war was changed. And the Syrian regime hasn't been toppled. The Syrian regime is now actually back on top. You have had Hezbollah, you have had Iran, you have had Russia. I think that became a situation where those others in the world said, wait a wee minute, we can't continue to allow America to get away with what they're doing here. And they decided to intervene, and they've turned the direction of that war, the whole Ukrainian situation. We've discussed it umpteen times. 2014, people must know that there was an elected functioning government in Ukraine that was not friendly towards the United States of America, and the US didn't like it. And the videotapes, all of the emails, all of the videos exist to show that they organised the coup. The Mayerden massacre was organised and coordinated by the CIA. They were involved in overthrowing a democratically elected government in Ukraine in 2014, and 8 years of war ensued. In the Donbass area, over 14,000 people were killed. So when people say the war started in Ukraine 2 years ago, they just don't know what they're talking about. The war started in 2014. Russia may have intervened 2 years ago because they were provoked to intervene. But that again is part of the changing narrative of the world. America thought, we can do what we want. We can get Ukraine to join NATO. We can put our nuclear weapons into Ukraine. Imagine Russia, China, Iran were to say, we're going to put nuclear weapons in Cuba. Wait a minute. Did that not happen in '62? And what did America threaten to do? Blow up the world. Blow up the world. It's the last time, Roddy. I wasn't born, and you were probably about 25 at the time. But the point is that time America was prepared to use nuclear weapons and risk the world. Why? Because Russia was going to put nuclear weapons in Cuba. But it's okay for NATO to put nuclear weapons in Ukraine, right on the border with Russia, and expect them to do nothing about it. Even Pope Francis has more courage than any of the international politicians come out and said, when you provoke the bear, inevitably the bear's going to respond. And that's what happened when the dog, I think the expression he used was, when the dog keeps barking at your door, eventually you're going to have to do something. And so from my point of view, Roddy, all of what's happening just now is representative of the decay in the existing world order and the birth of a new world order. I hope it is a world order that is multipolar instead of the unipolar world that we have, where America says jump and everybody else says how high. I despise America and their system. I despise that profit is everything to them. Life is meaningless to them. They don't care about democracy. They don't care about form of government as long as you do what America tells you. And it probably distills itself, Roddy. It distills itself. If people really want to try and look for how do you explain how decrepit the world has become, then ask yourself, in the so-called most powerful nation in the world leading democracy, in a few months' time, the people of America have a choice: Trump or Biden. Is that what we've reduced ourselves to in the world? Is that the educated world? Is that what we've reduced ourselves to? A choice between two people who are warmongers, who are illegitimate for the way they've ruled throughout the many, many years they've been in power. Trump in business, Biden in politics, trying to bail out his son and his corrupt deals in Ukraine. All of these things are coming home to roost. No wonder you now listen to some of the speeches for the Chinese, for the Russians, and they talk about the decrepit West. The West has become completely and utterly decrepit, in my opinion, Roddy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's quite. There was another thing I noticed today. You're talking about multipolarity, and it's coming. And it's the arrogance that the EU has now approved to take frozen Russian assets. Now, you and I are not economists, Tommy, but I'm sure we can get through this one. But they want to send them to Ukraine. So it's what the rest of the world who are not involved, the global southers are now being known. They've got to be looking and thinking, wait a minute, get your money out of London and New York, quick. Because they could take it if they don't like, if we don't do something they want, they could take all our money away. So they're actually self-harming. Do they actually think that the rest of the world looks on and goes, oh yes, well done, steal someone's money? Now, whether you believe in the Russian being in Ukraine or whatever you believe, the point is, it's like one of those, you say you don't bomb an one's embassy. You don't take people's money, the nation's money who's invested in your country, and give it to another country. It's theft by any other name, Tommy, and it's going to affect themselves because other people will start pulling their money out.
Definitely. Roddy, you'll remember just 2 or 3 years ago, the European Union stood with posters welcoming Guaido, who they said was to be recognised as the president of Venezuela. Guaido never stood in the election to be the president of Venezuela. But we, because America said it, we were to recognise Guaido rather than Nicolas Maduro, the elected president of Venezuela, and they decided to freeze the gold reserves of Venezuela in the city of London. Hundreds of millions of pounds worth of gold reserves stolen from the people of Venezuela, a country that has been sanctioned to the extent that they're denied essential medicines and foodstuffs and supplies for the manufacturing industry. And yet we were supposed to recognise an unelected guy as the new president that never even stood in the election. That's when you look at the European Union, Roddy, and people talked about Brexit and all the rest of it. I didn't want to be a member of the European Union because it's a horrible right-wing organisation that exists to combat socialism. It's an anti-socialist organisation, and if you don't believe me, go and look at its accords. It totally and utterly defends and promotes the free market and is opposed to public ownership. That's what the European Union exists to do. It's an anti-socialist institution. It's why Tony Benn, all his life a renowned socialist, was so anti-European Union. I'm anti-European Union. Some people didn't like that when I said that in 2016. I've got to say to you, there's a big shift now in opinion. The European Union is now stood up, exposed as nothing more than nothing less than a cheerleader of American imperialism and a supporter of Israeli genocide.
Absolutely, yeah, it's appalling. I mean, we don't have enough. We've got Claire Daly, of course, and Mick Wallerton, the European Union, two Irish MSPs who I would vote for every day. They're like you and me, Tommy. Certainly of the left, are brilliant. But you're right. I think now a lot of people, I think the opinion in Scotland is, for example, if, after independence, we'd go to EFTA to get into the single market, but they don't want to be in the European Union, the political union.
Roddy, why would you fight so hard to get your sovereignty and then give so much of it away? It always during the referendum campaign, I had three individual issues with the Yes campaign and the official Yes campaign. One of them was the Republic. I couldn't for the life of me accept that what we do in this new independent Scotland is we put the royal family on a diet and we have monarchy light. I just said, no, let's just have a republic. Let's have a democratic republic. The second thing I used to say was, I'm not accepting that we don't have our own currency. I think we develop our own currency. We've got the economy, we've got the oil, we've got the food and beverages industry. We've got more than enough to develop and sustain and support our own currency. Let's have our own currency. And then the third thing I used to say was, I'm not voting for independence so that we can stay in the European Union. I'm voting for independence so that we can decide in Scotland whether we stay in the European Union or not. And my vote would be for an EFTA position, for a Norway position, for a Switzerland position. We don't need to be in the European Union. It's a right-wing organisation, undemocratic to the core. So I've been a long opponent of the European Union, and I'll continue to be an opponent of the European Union. And in my vision of an independent Scotland, we don't fight to get a sovereignty to then give it away to the European Union.
Correct, I agree. I'm EFTA as well. Mind you, the way things are going, I wouldn't mind seeing Scotland in BRICS, but I don't think that'll ever be allowed. Otherwise, the B-52 bombers will arrive and we'll have some regime change overnight, as we know. But again, another rather rancid individual from America. But just before I go into that, I just want to say, you're talking about they've got Biden and Trump. What a terrible choice. Could I just say to you, Tommy, Starmer and Sunak?
Absolutely. What has the Western world became, Roddy? Where we're being defined by these individuals who are utterly horrible people, bereft of morals, bereft of principles. And that's the choice. That's what the West is reduced to. Is it any wonder we're the laughingstock of large parts of the world now?
No. I mean, in your lifetime, Tommy, have you ever known at all in anything, with exception of, maybe, well, no, it wasn't even a minor strike, but I've never known such a disconnect between the proletariat, all the people and the media and government, not just on in Gaza and on Ukraine and just general warmongering. But I have never known such a disconnect, and that is not healthy. It cannot go on and survive.
No chance. Nature abhors a vacuum, Roddy. Something will fill the vacuum. Unfortunately, in history, sometimes right-wing movements fill the vacuum. And you can see in parts of Europe, right-wing organisations, parties, even in South America in the shape of Argentina, you can see that the vacuum's been filled by the right rather than the left. We've got to be aware of that here in Scotland. We are not immune to some of the more right-wing regressive ideas. If the left doesn't stand up to the microphone, then the right will. And that's what's happening in many parts of Europe. The right are occupying the space that the left used to occupy. We have to stand up for the traditional communitarian values of equality, of justice, the idea of equal distribution, fair taxation. These are the things which I'm afraid the centrists have moved away from and are more inclined to support somebody who want to change their gender than they are supporting somebody who's a low-paid worker. And that's the problem. We have to return to politics which is about changing people's lives for the better. I'm for equality, I'm for defending minorities, but I'm not for allowing minority views to be portrayed as if they are mainstream when they are not.
I had, at the end of our prison at the weekend, I had this discussion with the guys, put it to you as well. You and I come from the old left and right politics. I think that's gone, Tommy. I think it's now horizontal. I think it's the elite against the proletariat at the bottom. It is really it's an up and down now. It's no longer so much left and right. I mean, I heard some American, but I can't remember British, referring to Biden as him and all these socialists. What? I mean, if that's the case, I don't know what. A man must be a Maoist or something, for God's sake, Tommy. What do you think
Roddy,
about
obviously that depiction is probably one of the most ridiculous you'll ever hear. And I know what you're saying. Some certainties that we used to all hold on to, and it made you left wing, you now question. I love Jeremy Corbyn and I'll support Jeremy 9 times out of 10. But his position on gender politics is something that I abhor. I don't accept that a 16-year-old kid can turn around and say, listen, I'm now a woman. I was born a boy, I'm now a woman, and you must legally refer to me as a woman, and I want legal rights as a woman. I'm sorry, it's just wrong. You have the right to change gender. It's there in the Equality Act 2010. As long as you're 18, as long as you've lived in that particular gender for over a year, as long as you've had medical advice and medical counselling. Some people say, oh, that's an infringement on their rights. I'm sorry. We're not talking about changing the colour of your hair. We're talking about something that is serious about your whole life. I don't think you're ready at 16 to take that decision. And the worry about those who argue that you are mature enough at 16 to take that decision, the thin end of the wedge, Roddy, that I'm concerned about, when you've got rules that are based on age and based on maturity, if somebody is ready at the age of 16 to decide whether they've been born into the right sex or not, then who's going to then come round and say at the age of 14, oh, wait a minute, that person can consent to whether they have a sexual relation or not. Let's just lower the age of consent as well. That's the thin end of the wedge of lowering the age of responsibility for big decisions like this. And unfortunately, that's where left-right has become very, very hazy. Because it used to be that the left would defend common sense, equality issues and ideas, redistribution of wealth. Now, I'm afraid some people who say they're on the left, they're coming out with arguments that are completely anti-women's rights.
Correct.
Fighting for women's rights was always something I believed, as a socialist, was a prerequisite of being a socialist. Now I've got some people who think that women's rights are liquid, negotiable. A man can be recognised as a woman and get the same rights, even though they were born as a man. I'm sorry, I don't accept it.
Yeah, but they want paid man's rates. They won't take the female pay. But you know, that's the thing. If you get someone who's anorexic, you wouldn't say, "Yeah, keep starving yourself. It's your right." Absolutely, don't you dare tell them that they've got to go and get help or get any medical consultation. That would be the same thing. Of course you wouldn't do that. But with this, and I think you're wrong about 16. A lot of them, like Maggie Chapman's, wanting it down to 8 years of age and whatnot, and the parents shouldn't be told. It's absolutely crazy.
I'm talking about the actual legislation of the Gender Recognition Act, where they're lowering it to 16, Roddy, but I know there are others behind the scenes, some very unsavoury characters who I think will soon be the age of sexual consent that they'll be arguing for to get lowered.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Keep away from the kids. It's the decadence has brought down every empire and every hegemony. And that's exactly what's going to happen to the West. Multipolarity is with us. Tommy, as always, my dear friend, I could sit here and talk to you probably till a week next Thursday. I never get bored and we never run out of things to talk about.
Well, Roddy, it's always a pleasure to talk to you, pal, because there's no agendas, there's no hidden agendas with you, pal. You express your opinions, I express my opinions. It just so happens that we actually share a lot of opinions, and that's great. Okay, we don't share or support our football clubs, but as you say, you don't want me to mention that. But listen, I hope when next time you're over in Scotland that we can meet up and have a chat.
Of course, absolutely. It's good to see you. Can't say a beer, but I'll have a beer. You can have a tea.
In fact, the last time I was over in your neck of the woods, you weren't there.
Aye.
I was over in Barcelona. Was it 7 or 8 weeks ago? And I was looking for tips for you about where to go. But you were in Scotland.
I was in Poland or Scotland. I've been in Scotland and Poland. I can't remember if I was in one of them. But next time you come back, my dear friend,
definitely,
you'll be our guest. Bring the family with you.
Definitely, brother.
You take care. Thank you. And to you,
all
folks,
the best.
I hope you've enjoyed as much as I have having our friend Tommy back in the show. And until we see you all again, please, you and yours, take care.
Through a Scottish Prism, the programme that is unapologetically pro-Scottish independence and anti-Westminster rule. Everything we say here is viewed through a Scottish prism. Brought to you by Barhead Boy.